Howdy doody, buckaroonies. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Hi, my name is Johnny Cat. Oh, no. Sorry, it's so hard to be an individual these days. It really is. Hi, my name is Benedict. What I'm going to do here is have a look at, and it's pretty rare for me to do this kind of stuff, especially these days, MidBoss by Analog Obsession. Sorry, wrong screen, because I normally use 3. And it does have some charms. I'm not a massive Analog obsessionist. I've had some of his things on my drive, and they've never really lasted. I too tend to be rather minimal, so something has to do something that other things don't do, or do easily. This has its charms. Whether it'll stick, I don't know. I only just got it, but it was like, oh, okay, that is interesting. So, what is it? It is a saturation device that is focused on bringing out particular flavours. Now, you can easily say, oh, well, that's not unique. Everything does that, sorta. Yeah, kinda, sorta. But generally they tend to be pretty broad, and where they bring out a certain sound, they tend to focus on, well, achieving somebody else's sound. Hi, my name is... that never works for me. Never does at all, because I think while there's a certain attraction towards saying, ooh, if only I could sound like, then I would be cool, I think that's a very dangerous thing, especially as indie artists. As indie artists, I always say, we need to be seen as unique. Because if we're just a watered-down clone of insert band X, then we're just going to get passed over, because chances are band X is already owning that space, therefore better at doing it than you're ever going to be. Not because you aren't more talented or more profile or more gooder than them. Often they're pretty narrow kind of bandwidths, but it's because people have accepted them as being that thing. So me suddenly putting on a wig and calling myself Lucy Darling is probably a really dumb plan. Me finding something that's me is a good plan. It is a plan that requires courage, and that's where most people go wrong. This is a device that perhaps has a little bit of courage in its own right. So what we've got here is a Europa, pretty standard Jupiter 80 kind of sound with onboard effects, and where we've got a switch, so between clean, MidBoss, or scream. So we're going to push that whole signal through this, like taking our Jupiter 8, plugging it through some effects, and then whacking it into a Neve. That's always the way that I say, well, that's how we have routed this thing. So the Neve, in this case our Analog Obsession MidBoss, is doing its thing. Clean, MidBossed. Quite simply, it's got various tones of change, is probably the best way to put it. Now in headphones it's very hard to hear this, it really is. So let's give it a little bit of goose. Off, on. We can definitely hear overtones happening in there. Now this is getting into just plain distorted. But it still adds a really nice thing. Now most times on these sorts of shows you see somebody using the lowest sound they can go, because bass, how low can go. And it sounds fabbo, it really does. Oh, now I've got to work out, there we go. But I tend not to do that stuff so much, in that I like my string sounds and my brass sounds, so it's got to work with chords. And a lot of the destroy all kind of programs just tend to get really fast. So this is interesting. Even their most aggressive thing, You can push a fair amount into it. It does depend on what levels you push in, especially if you're giving it polyphonic sound. Every time you add an extra note, then you're adding a lot of level, doubling, tripling your level, so to speak. You can really hear a sonic difference here. As that filter slightly opens, we really hear a kind of slightly nasal sound in there. Lifts the whole sound. That is really nice. Silky. Don't hear a lot down there. But up here, we hear a lot. Now, a thing I observe is that even when drive's at 0, it's either doing some drive, as in creating said overtones, or there is some kind of EQery going on in here. I truly, personally hope that it's not impulse responses, because I'm just not a fan of them. Algorithmic stuff, that's how analog work. You put something into this resistor which does something or other, which goes into that diode which does something or other else, and how it all comes together is the mungification. Whereas simply putting bunny ears on an Instaham camera, it doesn't create the same kind of change. It's cute, it's quick, it's easy, but it hasn't actually had the analog style. Not that I'm obsessed with analogness. Haha, analog obsession. Sorry, dude. But Silky definitely adds a lot of sheen up on the top end. Brassy. Here we're actually losing, we're losing some of our top end and adding weight in the bottom. Ooh, let's go down again. So our sound, which works with, which is the nature, of good saturation, is that it makes sounds seem to float and take on a life. Okay, that's pretty attached, even though there are randomizations and analoginess in the sound by default. Relatively flat. Alive. So the bassy thing does do its job, and then dusty. Very much pushing through the middle. It's kind of like the horror tone, the oratone of this setup here. Okay, you can dry, mix, wet. I have no interest in that, and you can change the overall level. Double click, goes back. There you go. That's it. Done. There doesn't seem to be an oversampling thing in here, but I really couldn't give a flying banana peel. It's either hard-coded to oversample or it isn't. I'm not seeing any delay compensation issues. Cool. But it's interesting in the sense that, let's dial it back to 10%. You can move through these different characters. Now, that's not to say you can't create these different characters with another device. Like here's one I prepared earlier. Screen. Switch it off. Switch it in. Scream is actually a great device, but it's not necessarily as easy to work with. You can get whatever you want out of it if you're doing things like pre and post EQing. It is a good device, but it's easy to feel like it's about as flat as where you started. In some ways, I quite like the overdrive. but it tends to scoop away a lot of the bottom end. So if you're looking for bassy, it's got a pretty noticeable change quotient there on the low end, which can be a liability. You can dial it back in or what have you, but Scream's a wonderful device, especially for when it was made. But our MidBoss here is definitely giving us different flavours out of the same material. The next thing that we would look at doing is, and this is where a lot of people go wrong, they're working on the one sound, not looking at the whole. Mixing is the whole. There was just some guy posted the Neutron Aries poster saying, I want those drum sounds. Not only did he not send us a link to be able to hear what said drum sounds were, but as I said to him, most likely in a very unpopular result, is that it's what he's hearing is what he's feeling. Sorry, let me do that again. What he's feeling is not what he's hearing. He thinks, oh, that's the sound. But it's the feel that the composer and mix engineers have put into that. So he could get those exact same drum sounds, and it wouldn't feel the same when he started to use them. Which is why often when you do get samples from sample packs, they're often very hard to work with because they're so overdone, they're just like you can't do anything with them. So getting liveliness, the reason that people say, oh, I want saturation and what have you, is a matter of layers. So we've got our sound here. Let's go back to no saturation. Let's put in some reverb. I tend to never work. A couple of times recently I have made that mistake and it's caused me some distress over my pieces. I feel I'm not getting there. And then I realised I haven't worked up a reverb space. I haven't said this is the space in which I'm composing this piece. Everyone's going to work differently, but I never mix without first setting the reverb space, the room in which this piece is going to happen as I create it. It's the scene. Without a scene, yeah, you can do some kind of hokey play, but you've got to create a scene. If you're doing a play without a scene, then the actors have to somehow create the scene. Look yon, here comes Yorick. Help set a scene. Look yon through the mist, here comes Yorick. Sets a slightly different scene. Oi, mate, Yorick's coming. Oh, jeez, mate, he tripped over the scrub there. Sets another scene. So we need to really set a scene, and our reverb has a huge impact. So notice how that has a big lift as well. If we combine the two, we've suddenly got something that, ooh, that's cool. And then, of course, we should, if we're using our Neve example, as in this is the point at which we jack everything into our Neve, our reverb would be coming back into our Neve, and therefore would get Nevified. And we get different feels. Subtle, you have to test this yourself, of what's happening here. So I've got my reverb, which is going through our MidBoss. So that's a lively sound now. If we turned off our they're working together. So this does something, this amplifies it even more. If we are staying true to our Neve example, then everything within our instruments should probably have the same settings. Otherwise, we've got stuff coming from disparate things. It's okay to say, yeah, okay, fine, because Tipton and Downing, playing guitar on the left and right-hand side of a Judas Priest record, probably don't have the same guitars, or the same heads, or the same combos, or even necessarily the same microphones shoved into the speaker of their combos. But when it hits the Neve, unless there's something horribly wrong with that Neve, and Judas Priest are wealthy enough to afford to go to somebody whose Neve has been serviced sometime in the last 57 years. So the valves and diodes and what have you are probably in decent shape. So consider in this method to keep the point where you're plugging into your Neve to be the same across the whole thing, but you might well want to have a slightly different flavour at a bus level or as a send return thing, because it's not uncommon for the guts in a desk and a Neve to be slightly different between a channel, some of the fancy buses, and things like returns. They can have different diodes attached to them. Here's another angle, taking a very different sort of sound, very FM sort of a sound. In this case, I've actually put the Neve, the MidBoss, before the effects. We've jacked our DX7 into the back of our Neve, and then from our Neve we've used inserts to go out to these effects. Inserts, not sends, because we've got our send here, which if we turn that off or on, so we can hear our different, again we'll emphasize, hear how those little, they actually sound real. Listen here, they do. What if we go down? Bearing in mind I rolled the bass off because, like a lot of FM sounds, the fundamental, the first sine wave can end up being too loud. Even there is a change. It's not one I would use necessarily, but there's a change. But I figure if you're using a DX7, then you probably want that kind of hype detail. If you don't, then you can be using one of the other setups, but this whole sound was designed for that top-endiness. And I can even consider, as I have, perhaps overdoing it. And letting it take over from the EQ, because it's going to have a different sort of a feel. This is how we get real presence in our mixes, assuming the performance is good. If your performance is no good, then you're just polishing a turd and no amount of this is going to achieve anything for you. But as a quick look, having just put this into my door and gone, okay, what's it going to do for me? Is it going to deliver me anything that I haven't already got? Well, I can already do these things, but it's very nice that he's focused each of these choices into a specific sort of a sound. Yes, in certain ways it would be nice to have one device that allowed me to have all the knobs, but at the same time, in this situation, I'm not sure that it's really necessary, because he's taken what seemed to be a fairly sensible progression of different kinds of sounds and said, here, we can weight it this way or that way or that way or that way. And none of them are too over the top. Okay, crunchy can be a bit, but there's always some mileage in having such a thing. And it sounds good. It feels good. And while I haven't had it for any extended period of time, it hasn't crashed reason, which is always a win. If you have any specific questions about this, pop them down below. If you want assistance in mixing or otherwise
producing, not beat making, I can make music for you, but it's a whole other thing. You need to know my style. Then reach out, follow my link to my website below, and reach out on the contact page. It's a high contact form because I want to know what you're doing before we start a conversation. Otherwise, I don't know what to converse with you about. Most importantly, get out there. You have a good day now.